What's up, guys? Ivan Carranza here, and welcome to Bass Tone Tuesday. Today, I want to give you 10 bass recording tips that have helped me in the past. And the idea for this video came because this past week, I've been recording the bass tracks for my new band, Ashmakers. In case you haven't subscribed to our channel, I'm going to put a card up here. Also a link in the description below because we're going to release music pretty soon and the stuff that we're recording is really badass. But while I was recording, I noticed some things that I've picked up over the years that have helped me, and I thought I would share it with you. So tip number 1 is to learn the material, learn the song. That sounds kind of obvious, but when you're coming prepared to record and you know the material, it's gonna save everyone's time. It's gonna save your time, it's gonna save the engineer's time or the rest of the band. And if you're paying for a studio, it's also gonna save you money. So if you and your band are about to record something, just practice the material so you can play it in your sleep, so that you go and deliver a performance from the beginning and you don't have to sit there and go, oh, how does this song go again? That just wastes time and is not efficient work. Now there's a difference if you're called for a recording session and you don't know the material and you show up and you just hear the song for the first time. If that's the case, I would recommend making a chart with the structure of the song. It doesn't have to be like everything like written notation. You can just put chords like C, B, G major. Very simple, but that gives you a structure that you can follow while recording, and you don't have to relearn the stuff while you're recording. And like I mentioned, that saves time. Tip number 2 is to have the right type of strings. And I originally wrote that as having new strings, but that doesn't always apply because sometimes you want to have really dead flat wound strings. For example, if you're recording a soul or Motown style track, you can either use flat wounds or tape wounds that give you a really thuddy and percussive tone. So in that case, you do not want, or probably do not want, very fresh new strings. For rock and pop and other genres, you probably want to use a new set of strings, or a fresh set of strings at least, because that gives your sound the most amount of harmonics, the most amount of clarity, and that allows the engineer to be able to work with your signal. So remember, always have the right type of strings. Tip number 3 is to always keep a clean DI track as a backup. This also applies if you can only record one signal. It's pretty helpful to have a completely naked and dry DI, because later you can either run it through amp simulations, or you can reamp that signal, or just apply EQ to make that fit in the mix. And sometimes we record our amp, or you're using pedals, and you're already EQing that signal. And sometimes it happens that that sound doesn't necessarily fit in the final mix. So having a backup clean DI signal also helps there, because then the engineer can take that signal and morph it or reamp it or apply an amp simulation to make that signal work. Remember, always keep a clean DI track as a backup. For example, what I've been doing this past week is that I've been recording with my Noble and having that as a clean DI track, and then I'm providing the mixing engineer with a couple different versions of an amp sound so that he can then make the signals fit in the mix, but he always has my DI track, which he can then use if needed. Tip number 4 is to gain stage properly. And this applies more if you're on your own recording. And if you Google that, you're gonna find a million different opinions. And that's because, back in the day when people recorded with tape, you wanted to have the most amount of signal compared to the noise. So you wanted to have a good signal to noise ratio. Therefore, people used to record as loud as possible. Nowadays, we're recording most of the time with digital equipment, and there you can either gain up a signal or gain down a signal without any issues most of the time, unless you are recording super quietly at -40 dB And if you gain that up, you're gonna induce some noise. But if you're recording, within healthy signal levels, I usually track or try to record between -18 to -10. And I mean, it could be even harder because you can either gain it down later. But within those ranges, I've noticed that then the signal works well with other plugins, especially plugins that are emulations of old school recording gear, like console emulations or compressors emulation, because some of those plugins are set to work at -18 dB. Not all of them, and some also have like an input pad so you can control how much signal is going into the plugin, but some don't. So having a signal close to -18 usually works the best, I've noticed, at least with the plugins that I used. So as a rule of thumb, you don't want to clip the signal. That's like terrible. You don't want to go into the red of your DAW, and you don't want to record too quiet that the signal is inaudible. So like I mentioned, I try to keep it -18 to -10, 12, in that range. Tip number 5 is to play to the drummer. And this applies, of course, if you've received a real recorded drum track. And I'm saying this because there's a lot of emphasis in playing to a metronome, which is completely legit. You should be able to play to a metronome too. But if you're already provided with the track that's going to be used by the drummer, if you can play to that, you're going to get a better feel than if you play everything correctly, align it 100% to the grid. Because sometimes when you play everything like perfect, aligned to the grid, it doesn't sound that good when heard back to back with the drummer at the same time, because we're human. We don't place every hit like directly on the beat all the time. And those like micro fluctuations of the beat make the performance sound and feel good. So if you have a drum track played by a real drummer, either turn off the click, or what I do is, for example, I blend the click pretty quietly so that I hear it. And this helps if there are sections where you don't play, or complicated sections where you really have to hear the time going constantly. But that way you're paying much more attention to what the drummer is playing, and you don't hear the click going in your ear the whole time. And I've noticed that has helped me deliver better performances. So play to the drummer. Tip number 6 is to record full performances. And by that I mean is to try to at least record the song from beginning to end. Because that way your performance is gonna sound more natural, because you are gonna make adjustments automatically to fit the different sections of the song. So you're not gonna think that much, you're gonna play and deliver a solid performance. Because if you are punching in the whole time and you're playing things that are correct in theory, sometimes it doesn't feel or sound right because the energy levels don't fit the section that you just punched in. So, and by playing a complete take, you're gonna naturally adapt to that. So for example, you're gonna play the first verse a bit quietly or a bit quieter, and then when the chorus arrives, your energy levels are gonna rise. Then the second verse is gonna be a bit lower than that, and then the next chorus is gonna be louder, and then the last chorus is gonna be like really explosive. And you're gonna adjust naturally to that. If you're constantly punching in every like 2 bars or 4 bars, it can sound sometimes a bit robotic. So try to record full takes. Tip number 7 is something similar to that, and that is to punch in when necessary. We're gonna make mistakes sometimes when recording. Maybe, one section you make a little mistake, you get some fret buzz in there, or some bass line doesn't sound as clean as it could be, or maybe you're dragging at some point or rushing at some point. And those sections you can definitely punch in, but try to do it only when necessary, because for the reasons that I mentioned previously, when you record a bigger chunk of music, it's gonna feel and sound more natural. So punch in when necessary. Tip number 8 is to have a good monitor mix. And what a good monitor mix depends on the situation. For example, if you're recording with a lot of people in the same room, like the whole band, You probably might want to have more things in your ear to give you a more realistic sound experience, and that way you're going to be able to perform better. If you're recording on your own, what I try to do is to have only the things that I really need on my mix. And this also applies to playing live with in-ear monitors, because sometimes, you know, there might be like 1,000 keyboard layers or samples happening. You probably don't want to have those cluttering your ears, because they do not provide you with, you know, necessary information to help you to deliver a good performance. Sometimes you do need those samples because, I don't know, they're an important part of the song. But most of the time I try to keep things very reduced. For example, this past week that I've been recording, I had the drums pretty loud in my mix and the vocals at a, I would say, moderate level, because that way I can play to the drummer and also have the singer guiding me with the intensity of his voice so that I can adjust my performance to the song as well. Because when I hear that, you know, the singer is giving a lot of energy in the chorus, you know, I can also go with that, and the song is gonna sound more natural that way. And I didn't have any guitars, for example, so that I can pay more attention to the drums and to the singer. But what you need on your ears depends on your taste as well, but I would suggest only having what you really need to have in your ears. Tip number 9 is to be open to try new ideas or to try new things. This can be to try a new bass line or adjust your performance, especially if you're recording for somebody else and they ask you to do, I don't know, bass line A in the style of, I don't know, Paul McCartney, and maybe try to add some flea in there, or what would it sound like if, I don't know, John and Twistle would play that line, and you have to adapt to that. And something similar happened to me this past week, because our drummer played some really cool drum fills in one of the songs, and I had practiced my bass lines and my bass riffs, and I decided, you know, what would happen if I tried to tag along to the fills that he's doing, so kind of copy what he's doing rhythmically, but adjust it to some fill or a run or something. And because I was open to trying that out, what came out was actually really, really cool. And I was surprised, really surprised, because that is something that I wouldn't have come up with if I wasn't open to trying to mimic what he was doing. So you can definitely get ideas from what the other instruments are doing and incorporate that into your line, but you have to be open to trying new things, even if, you know, you have to practice them a little before recording. At the end, or in the end, it might benefit the final recording if you decide to try and explore new things. Tip number 10 is to deliver a good performance. And I know this might sound obvious, but sometimes you play something, a bass line, a riff, and everything is right, but it doesn't sound or feel right. Because playing something once is different than delivering a good performance. And sometimes a good performance doesn't necessarily have to be right. You might be a bit off time, or there might be a mini mistake somewhere, but it adds something. It adds energy, and the sound is right, and the intention behind the notes is right, and that makes a good performance. And sometimes, you know, that, even with the mistakes and everything, sounds better than something that's played completely correctly or right. And you can hear this if you listen to some isolated bass tracks. If you listen to them, some are pretty dirty or sloppy, or there might, you know, they're not playing that cleanly, but in the context, they just sound extremely good. So remember that a good performance doesn't have to be like perfect all the time. And what matters is if it sounds and feels good. Of course, you should try to play as the best as you can, but sometimes when listen to your takes, the one that sounds and feels the best might not be the perfect one. As a bonus tip, I want to give you something that's been saving me a lot of money recently, and that is to use this thing. Here in Germany it's called Brennspiritus, and it's denaturated alcohol. It's I think it's 90% alcohol, so it's used for cleaning. And I think in Spanish-speaking countries it's called alcohol industrial, or maybe alcohol desnaturalizado. And if you grab a container, like a Tupperware or something, fill it with this, and then put your old strings there to soak up overnight or over several days, when you put them back on your bass, they're gonna sound pretty much brand new. And that has been saving me a lot of money on strings, because I kill strings super fast. And these things, I mean, a bottle of this costs here in Germany about €2, and I've been using them for a bunch of set of strings to put them in and then put them back on my bass. And of course you can only do that, you know, so often. If after I don't know, 4 or 5 times that you do it, you should probably get a new set. But if you have 2 sets of strings, you can put one on your bass, let one swim there, and then rotate them, and that way you have strings for a long time, and it's gonna save you a lot of money. I hope you guys liked this video. Let me know what you think in the comments, and also don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay up to date with the content that's coming to the channel. As always, thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Take care.